So, how do you actually build a nation? It's not just about drawing lines on a map or writing a bunch of laws. No, you need a story, a really powerful, unifying story that tells everybody who you are and where you came from. And today, we're digging into Switzerland, a country whose whole identity is really forged from two key ingredients: epic legends, and some seriously hard-won history. Okay, let's get in.
Picture this. It's 1386, the Battle of Sempach. The Swiss fighters are completely pinned down by this terrifying wall of Austrian pikes. Victory looks, well, it looks impossible. And then, out of nowhere, one man, Arnold von Winkelried, he just charges forward. He grabs an armful of the enemy's spears, pulls them into his own chest, and in that moment, he creates an opening for his comrades to pour right through. It's this incredible, heroic sacrifice that really comes to define a nation's spirit.
And then, of course, you've got the other great hero, William Tell. You know the story. He's forced by this tyrant, Bailiff Gessler, to shoot an apple off his own son's head. He makes the impossible shot, but reveals he had a second arrow ready for the tyrant. It is the ultimate story of defiance, of standing up to oppression, a tale that's been told for centuries.
But what happens when we take these incredible, larger-than-life stories and put them under the historical microscope? This is where the whole narrative gets really fascinating. Were these heroes actual people, or were they something the Swiss people needed them to be?
Well, when we actually look at the historical record, a very different picture starts to emerge. The story of William Tell, it doesn't even show up until around 1474, which is a long time after the events were supposed to have happened. Historians have scoured the archives. There's no trace of a Tell or a Gessler, and that amazing apple shot story, turns out it's almost a carbon copy of a much older Danish legend about a hero named Toka.
The story of Winkelried shows a really similar evolution. I mean, it wasn't born fully formed. It started in the 1480s, just a story of some unnamed, faithful man. But then, over the next 150 years, you see chroniclers adding little details, first uniform, then a family name, and finally a full identity as the brave knight Arnold von Winkelried. The legend was literally being written into history piece by piece.
So, you see where this is going. This brings us to the big question. If the stories of Tell and Winkelried are basically foundational myths, what's the actual, real, documented origin of the Swiss Confederacy? What really happened back then?
Well, the answer isn't found in some dramatic, heroic act of rebellion. It's actually in something a lot more practical. A legal document. We're talking about the Federal Charter of 1291.
Now, it is so crucial to understand this. This charter was not a revolutionary manifesto. It wasn't a declaration of independence. See, a really powerful Habsburg king, Rudolf I, had just died, and that created a huge power vacuum. So the communities of Uri, Schweiss, and Underwalden, they made a pact to keep the peace, reject foreign judges, and basically have each other's backs. It was a conservative move, all about ensuring stability, not some radical break for freedom.
But political pacts are only half the story. There was a massive societal shift happening, and it was all triggered by the Black Death in the mid-1300s. The plague created this severe labor shortage, which meant that for the people who survived, wages went through the roof. Suddenly, labor-intensive grain farming, or corn, just wasn't practical anymore. So they switched to livestock farming, or horn, which needed way fewer people. This corn-to-horn transition created this whole new, prosperous export economy based on cattle and cheese.
Now, while pacts and economics were changing society from the inside, Swiss autonomy wasn't just signed into existence. No, it was won on the battlefield. This is the story of how a bunch of so-called peasant infantry learned to beat the most powerful, most armored armies in all of Europe.
The first big test came at Morgarten in 1315. And this wasn't a battle. It was a brilliantly executed ambush. The Swiss used their home field advantage to perfection, luring the armored Habsburg knights into this narrow pass. From the high ground, they just unleashed hell, boulders, logs, and then their infantry, armed with these deadly halberds, swarmed down on the completely disorganized column. It was a massacre.
And this brings us right back to Sempach in 1386. Even without the whole Winkelried legend, the Swiss victory was still incredible. The Austrian knights got off their horses to create this supposedly unbreakable wall of pikes. But historical analysis suggests that these heavily armored knights were just exhausted by the July heat, and the more nimble Swiss infantry simply outfought and outmaneuvered them in close-quarters combat.
But the ultimate proof of Swiss military power, the conflict that really put them on the map, That came in the Burgundian Wars. Their opponent was Charles the Bold, the Duke of Burgundy, who was one of the most powerful and ambitious rulers in Europe at the time. This was the big one.
The Swiss won 3 absolutely decisive victories. At Granson, they seemed to just emerge from a forest, surprising the Burgundian army and causing a total panic. At Morat, they did it again. They used the woods for cover and then launched this devastating assault. And the final blow came at Nancy, where Charles the Bold himself was killed in battle. These wins weren't just luck, they were a masterclass in Swiss tactics.
The victory at Granson was so total that the Swiss captured the Duke's entire camp. We're talking about the legendary Burgundian booty, a treasure trove of jewels, artillery, and banners. This was so much more than just the spoils of war. It was a powerful symbol of their victory that sent shockwaves across Europe and cemented their fearsome reputation.
Okay, so we have the legal pacts, we have the economic shifts, and we have these incredible military victories. That's the documented, real history. But what about the myths? Why, in the face of all of this, did the stories of Tell and Winkelried become so central to the Swiss identity?
The answer, it turns out, lies in the 19th century. After centuries of being just a loose confederation and even a brief civil war, the modern Swiss federal state was created. This new country was filled with people who spoke different languages, practiced different religions. They needed a common history, a shared set of heroes to bring everyone together. And this was a very deliberate, very conscious process. It wasn't until 1891, which is pretty recent when you think about it, that the government officially declared August 1st, 1291 as the nation's founding moment. That quiet, practical, legal document was suddenly elevated to the status of this grand declaration of freedom, with William Tell and Winkelried as its patriotic poster boys.
And maybe this gets right to the heart of it all. These stories weren't really meant to be read as literal history. The real power is in the values they represent. This fierce love of freedom, a willingness to stand up to tyranny, and the idea that ordinary people, when they work together, can achieve extraordinary things.
So it leaves us with this final thought. What truly forges a nation's identity? Is it the complex, often messy, sometimes inconvenient reality of historical events? Or is it the simple, powerful, and inspiring stories we choose to tell ourselves about who we are and what we stand for?